Hey, folks, welcome back to the Husker Big Red podcast. I'm Chris Peterson, and this is Danny Gillette, my co host as always, and it's Monday. We obviously only had one episode last week. I had some day job requirements, was covering a state basketball tournament here in Montana, where I'm from, along with our punter. So Brian Bushini. So we're back this week, and obviously, the first topic of conversation is Nebraska basketball. The season is officially over. We haven't had an episode since the Big Ten tournament with the loss to Minnesota. If you missed it, Nebraska was not selected for the NIT, even though they were eligible to go. They were even projected to go by one of the most prominent NIT bracketologists. That was like the one pick that he missed, but the Huskers did not make it. And I guess we'll just start there, Danny, to kind of incorporate that last game into this question too. But was it fair or not for Nebraska basketball to be left out of the NIT?
I think it was because there were some winnable games earlier in the season that they should have maybe won that they just didn't take care of business. And I think although they had that strong stretch towards the end of the season, I think they needed a little bit of a more solid resume. I mean, even just that Michigan State loss at the end of February really stands out. And I'm not going to say one game was make or break for the NIT, but when I think back on recent games, that was one that could have certainly changed their fortune. And, although we would have liked to have seen additional basketball, I think, I always thought personally that they needed to win at least two games in the Big Ten tournament in order to make the NIT. So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it was fair. They had a good stretch at the end, but they just didn't do enough in terms of winning at the beginning of the season until it was too late.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, I wanted them to be in the NIT. I was
Oh, for
hoping
sure.
that
I
it worked
totally did.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought they had an outside chance to get like that, one of the bottom seeds, but it's not, this isn't the NIT of 20 years ago. Like we said, small conference champions, the regular season champ gets that guaranteed berth. So there's really not a ton of at-large berths, and it's difficult to make the field. You have to have a quality resume, and Nebraska's resume took a pretty big hit. I mean, when they lost to Minnesota, that they did not have a bad loss, a loss of like a quad three loss, and that Minnesota was by far the worst loss of the season. And so I think with some of the other teams, that ended up, I mean, Washington State made it with like 17-15. Michigan had a record that was similar to that. So Nebraska, I just think they needed another win or two. They may have needed to beat, Maryland in that second round too. And I think just, losing to Minnesota, it dinged the resume enough. They did, however, I mean, they had a lot of impressive wins over teams that made the tournament, but like Wisconsin and let's see, in Rutgers, those wins maybe weren't quite as good. Those teams didn't make the field, so I can understand why they didn't make it, and I still think that it was a successful season. I mean, 16-16, they didn't have a losing record for the first time of the Hoiberg era, so I mean that was a positive. So at the end of the day, as much as it bums me out that we don't get to see them play another game, I do think that it was probably fair where they ended up.
Yeah, and I do think that it was still, like you said, a successful season. They did better than I thought they would do at the beginning of the year, and now it's about who is going to stay. What's the turnover going to be like? Can they keep Kisi Tominaga is my main question, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do. I mean, they've already reached out to a couple players in the portal, so they're already looking to fill holes here. And I think as much as it's been an up and down tenure for Fred Hoiberg. Now that he's made it to 17-16 with players that were impactful from the transfer portal and guys like Walker, Greasel, Vandemel, and Gary before they got hurt. I mean, now I think the bar's been set a little bit. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect at least a 500 record. I think coming into next season, and I'm sure we'll get into this more down the road, but I think Fred needs to have a winning 2023-24 season, or at least make the NIT, because as great as this season was and as much progress as they showed, it's kind of ironically like the basketball schedule itself this year. There hasn't been enough impressive wins in order to you know warrant Fred coming back. And I'm not putting him on the chopping block. I'm just saying that there's a bar that's been set now, and I expect the program to at least be at 500 for next year because there's no reason not to, quite frankly.
Yeah, I agree with that. And especially when you consider, you know, all the things that Nebraska's invested in the basketball. I mean, they could invest more in the basketball program, and we've talked about that. But I think that Trev Alberts has shown he's pretty willing to, do what's necessary to win. And so I would like to see, some more, basketball staff and maybe some more investment in the recruiting side of things. And we've talked about the NIL thing too, because in the transfer portal in college basketball, it can be a big deal. It's because with basketball, there's not as many key players to add. In football, there's hundreds and hundreds of guys. And with basketball, there's only so many people that can come in and be a starter and an impact starter for you. There's so many Sam Greasels out there, and Nebraska's going to have to try to hit on a couple of those guys. I do feel good about like Eli Rice coming in as a freshman. He took a prep year at IMG, faced a lot of really good competition and has looked pretty solid. And I feel like he has an opportunity to make a pretty early impact next season, but they're going to have to find a big guy. They've, talked with a couple, but like you said, the biggest question surrounding this program is what's going to happen with Tominaga. Is he going to come back? I hope he does. I'm kind of resting my hope with the fact that, he has a dream of playing in the NBA. I think that's part of the reason he came to Nebraska in the first place. And that's still the best path for him if that's what he wants to do. If he is, ready to take a big money contract and go to Japan, like it's going to be hard for Nebraska to compete with that. But if the NBA is his dream, then Nebraska is the best place for him to try to reach that.
And at this point in Fred Hoiberg's tenure, it should take one player to completely collapse a program. And so, I'm thinking, I think that they have to recruit and prepare like he is going to leave and hope he comes back because I think they need to make sure that they can find some sort of foundation for next season should Tominaga leave. I mean, we saw it a little bit, Sam Hoiberg, Denham Dawson, Lawrence I think is going to be massive whether Tominaga stays or not. I was really really impressed with his development, but it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, and I'll just say it again. I think Lawrence is going to be a major, major piece of what they do next season.
Yeah, I agree. And so when I look at it, I mean, Lawrence, I expect obviously to fully be back, and he's gonna play a starring role. I think, yeah, whether Tominaga's back or not, but Gary should be back. Juwan Gary, and he's going to be I would assume as long as he's healthy, he's going to be starting in that 4 spot. I think that that just makes a lot of sense. With a guy who can shoot and rebound and he can guard, because 4 guys aren't always like that post up player anymore. And you need kind of a versatile defender, because if you have an oversized 4, then teams will take advantage of you with that like 6'8" guy, kind of like of the guy at Minnesota, Jamison Battle, or yeah, I'm not sure if that's a correct on his last name, but anyways, he's just
Yeah,
a good
you're right.
example of
Yeah.
like somebody like that. So Gary, obviously, so they're going to need a center. They've got, I mean, Blaise Keita, I think, has a chance. I just don't know if his offensive game is developed enough to where you can say that's a guy that can play 30 minutes a night. He's probably
I
better
agree.
off playing like 17.
Yeah.
Same with Brian Bach. I just haven't seen enough from him to say I trust him to play 25, 30 minutes as a starter. Now he could
You know how
develop
I
into
feel
that.
about him.
Yeah, but yeah, now that could change, but so far, Nebraska, and he just, there's no role for him. The 4
No.
would be his best spot. So, I mean, honestly, Breidenbach and Keita, I think, are fine as the backups. At the 4 and 5 position, those guys can give you solid minutes like they did this year. But you need to find a starting center, and then if Tominaga comes back, then I think you would have like a 3-guard lineup again with Lawrence and then Tominaga and then whoever they get, in the transfer portal. Because I do think that they need to find a point guard in the transfer portal.
Yeah, and that's not a bad lineup at all. I mean, that really is not a bad lineup, and I
Mm-hmm.
think honestly, not even to, you know, dog on him or make fun of him, but I really do think Breidenbach needs to find out what type of player he is, and then once he finds out whether he's a shooter or a post player, then I think that will help everybody involved. Because I do think he does have some skill. I mean, he does have hustle. He gets some rebounds and plays hard. I just sometimes he looks like a chicken with his head cut off out there. So, I mean, as long as he finds a role or finds his game, this upcoming season, I'm definitely willing to give him another shot, as if I have to say in all this. But I mean, as a fan, I'm definitely willing to give him, another chance. He's just so frustrating because he was a 4-star recruit. He was a very highly rated recruit, and
Yeah, top 100.
yeah, you just haven't seen anything from him. So I think his development is going to be an interesting storyline to watch for next fall as well.
Yeah, they need to find a good role that suits him, and he needs to shoot the ball more consistently. That's a big thing. And he did have a stretch this year where there was like a 5 or 6 game stretch where he was averaging like 8 or 9 points. I remember touching on it in one of my post game takeaways, but then he fell right off a cliff again. So I mean, his first step is just being consistent enough to play like 15 to 20 minutes a night and not get like 3 fouls in 5 minutes. I mean, that's one of the things he tends to do. And it's like, yeah, every foul doesn't hurt you, but every foul does get you closer to the bonus. And teams that win consistently, and these games in the Big Ten are super close. And the teams that win, they don't foul and they don't turn the ball over. And I mean, it's like, I know that doesn't sound that complicated, and there's more that goes into it than that, but those are two pretty basic things that you can do as a basketball team to put yourself in a winning situation. And it doesn't help when, like you said, Breidenbach's out there with looking like a chicken with his head cut off, fouling people. You know what I mean? So he's got to get that under control too, and play good defense without drawing fouls.
Well, he either wants to be the next Larry Bird or the next Shaquille O'Neal. He can't figure out what he wants to try to do. But, truthfully, I think some of it stems from his injuries. I think when I look at, the 2021-22 season when he suffered the injury in December, I thought he was turning the corner, last year, like that season, and then the injury kind of set him back. So I think, in order to find consistency, he just has to stay healthy. And sometimes, and this is not a guy's fault, sometimes, the injury bug bites them. So I just hope he can stay healthy and kind of have confidence and find a role to suit him because he frustrates me to no end. But I understand there's so many factors in play for him, and I really do hope he succeeds and finds his game because the player that I see on the high school tapes is not the player I quite frankly see at Nebraska.
Yeah, and, another talking about highly rated recruits and a guy, like I'm interested to see what happens with Ramel Lloyd. He was actually Nebraska's highest rated recruit in the last class, and I believe he ended up redshirting. I don't think he played this year, and so it's going to be interesting to see kind of what happens with him. If Casey does leave, he's a 6'6" wing, and a guy that was a 4-star recruit. So I mean, he could be a guy that's potentially in the mix. But I mean, it's pretty impressive, like with Jamarcus Lawrence, a guy that's barely, ranked inside the top 200 to come in and make the impact that he did, at the end of the season. So that was a really good find by Fred Hoiberg, because there's honestly guys that were ranked, much higher in the top 100 that didn't have the type of impact that he did. So, that was a big time get, I think. And it'll be interesting to see. I mean, Blaise Keita, looking back, was the number one, JUCO center, when Nebraska signed him. So, I mean, his development could, kind of take a step forward. And I mean, yeah, worst case scenario, you could have him and Breidenbach, splitting minutes at center. It's not like that would be the worst thing ever, but I
I
mean, it would be a big drop off from Derek Walker. I mean,
Well,
no doubt.
anything is gonna be, so I don't think it's fair to like, and I'm
Well,
not saying
no,
you're
but
doing that, but like for
yeah,
fans in general, like to expect him to be Derek Walker is pretty crazy. But I think he's another guy that is kind of confused on what his game is. I like his energy, I like his hustle, kind of like Breidenbach, but like the center position and that kind of power forward big man position is taking a huge hit when Walker goes, and some of these guys are going to have to step up, and I have questions about whether they can do it, but I hope they prove me wrong.
yeah, and hopefully Fred can, I mean, he's been pretty successful over the years in the transfer portal, and I feel like they have, momentum. And look, it looked fun playing for Nebraska last year basketball. I mean, the stadium is packed. The fan base is extremely passionate, and they've got some kind of predefined roles where you could step in. I mean, you saw what Sam Greasel did last year, for Fred Hoiberg, and whether he's going to play professionally or not, he definitely improved his stock, and he could at least play, in Europe or whatever. So I think if I was, in the transfer portal, I think that's something to take into consideration. And Hoiberg's coached in the league, and he's sent a lot of guys to the league, from his time at Iowa State. So I think Nebraska should be able to attract, at least a couple of guys. But it depends. There's a huge difference between a top end portal guy and kind of a middle range guy. And like one example that stands out to me, as with my Michigan ties or whatever, is that Michigan was going to try to get Terrence Shannon in the transfer portal, who ended up being an all Big Ten player for Illinois, ended up going to Illinois, and instead they missed on him for a number of reasons, and they got Joey Baker from Duke, who wasn't very good. So I mean, it's like one guy's an all Big Ten player, one guy ended up playing like 14 minutes a game. So that's that's kind of the difference you can see in the transfer portal at times.
Although, I do think there has been a lot of recent success to point to, why fans should feel confident about, this team
Mm-hmm.
going in the transfer portal. We have, Bandamel, Gary, Walker. Remember, he came from Tennessee. It seems like 10 years ago now, but
Yeah.
Greasel. So, Nebraska's been, pretty solid, honestly, in the portal. So I wouldn't mind them going that route, and I'm not afraid of them going that route. I just, to me, we need to find a point guard that kind of plays like Greasel, because he was, he, looked for teammates, passed the ball, but also was not afraid to shoot. And he didn't really play hero basketball. He made the other players on the floor around him better. And I think that's the mark of a good point guard. And I know it's not easy to find, you know, what you're looking for specifically in the transfer portal, but I definitely think there's qualities from Greasel that Nebraska should look for if they elect to go the portal route.
One thing that's going to be difficult to replace about Sam Greasel, or that kind of made him unique for Nebraska, was his size and how they used him defensively. Because Nebraska had kind of a, when you think about like Tominaga and Lawrence, those guys aren't that tall. So defensively that could put Nebraska. I mean Lawrence is 6'3". I want to say Tominaga is 6'4". Could be wrong on that. He might be even shorter than that, but it kind of puts Nebraska at a little bit of a disadvantage. So I mean, like you saw, Greasel at times had to there was many times where he wasn't guarding the point guard because he had to guard a bigger 3-4 guy. And so that's one thing, if Nebraska's not able to find, and I don't think they're gonna find a guy like that, because I think Griesel's like 6'7". I could be wrong on that too. I know he's 6'6" range, but what that most point, if your point guard's like 6'2" or something, and then you've got Lawrence and Tominaga, I mean that's a pretty small 3-guard lineup. And it could be really great for scoring, but defensively, there might be some concerns there. And, that's where you have to look at doing different things defensively, zone defenses and stuff. But just one thing I wanted to point out about Sam that's going to be hard for Nebraska to replace is how they were able to kind of move him off the point guard and match him up with other bigger players at other positions.
And I've said this 500 times, but I really wish we had him for one more season.
Yeah.
I said the same thing about Trey Palmer too in football. So, you
Yep.
know, it's it's going to be interesting to see. And also, you mentioned defense. I think Derek Walker played bigger than he often was, and I think that's going to be tough to replace too as well. Not so much in terms of defense, but in terms of grit and the physicality he brought to the game. He was kind of a bit of a throwback in a shooting game now. He was, that gritty, defender. And so I think, Nebraska's gonna miss that as well, because he did bring an edge and a sort of, physicality to the game that really kind of gave opponents fits. And he got in foul trouble sometimes for it, but that was a part of his game that he really kind of hung his hat on, and it worked.
Yeah. They are going to have to, he's going to be tough to replace. And I do think he's going to be playing professional basketball somewhere. So, I would like to see that. And yeah, I wish we had another year with both of those guys. But, lots of questions for Nebraska basketball. And, we'll keep addressing that in the future. I think the next month or so is going to be pretty important in terms of, what happens with some of these decisions. Players do have, a bit of time before they, declare for the draft. What I hope, this is my ideal scenario for Nebraska, is that Keisei Tominaga basically stays, but puts his name into the NBA draft, evaluation process. Not, I don't think he's going to get drafted. So, if that happens, don't freak out. It just basically, it gives him a chance to figure out where he is. Because look, if he wants to go to the NBA, that's what he needs to do. Come back, declare for the draft, go through that process, see where he's at, withdraw his name in May, and then go full forward, next year at Nebraska. So hopefully that's what happens. But I want to switch gears just a little bit to, some recruiting, Danny. I know I haven't been quite as up on the recruiting use as you are, but it looks like Nebraska, continues to add, key players to, that March visit weekend coming up on the 25th. So just kind of give us an update on what's going on with that.
Well, the big one for me is David Hall. I mean, he's been a guy that's been on my recruiting board for quite a while, wide receiver. You all know who he is, or a lot of you know who he is, because he's been a highly rated recruit. So he's scheduled to come, and then they have a running back that is going to come on March 24th and 26th, whose name I am completely blanking on right now. But he's got offers from Alabama, Auburn. Um, I'll have to look him up here in a second, but there's just more visitors added to that. March 25th.
Is it Peyton Lewis? Is
Yeah,
that
Peyton Lewis. There we go. Peyton Lewis. I mean, he's not ranked in the 24/7 Sports Composite or whatever, but I mean, he's got Boston College, Penn State, Alabama, Auburn. So he's an up and coming player, and he's gonna come to Lincoln during that time frame, and there's there's a lot of visitors coming, and I'll be interested to see what comes of it, because we've talked about it a lot over the past couple weeks, but it just seems like there's more names every day, and I'm excited that the staff is continuing to keep tabs on Hall. I know Hall was, a big Mickey Joseph recruit, and he's a guy to me that I think is extremely important, because we have a lot of wide receivers, but when you look at in-state talent, having Jalen Lloyd and Hall on the same team would be wonderful for recruiting in the state. And Hall's a speedster and Hall's a deep threat, so I think that would definitely be a promising sign for Nebraska football moving forward. And I'm trying to think, the Missouri receiver, whose name I'm blanking on right now, four-star receiver.
Ryan Wingo?
There we go. He's coming. And
Yep.
so the program offered him, I believe, at the end of January. I know Matt Rule was in Missouri at the end of January visiting him. It seems like they want to make Missouri a priority area, which is good. And, again, I love Wingo, same type of deal. Deep threat, speedy, can run after the catch, crisp route runner. So, I'm sure a lot of you are probably getting bored of seeing my visit articles, but A, there's not a ton to write about in the way of football right now. And B, I think these visits, it's important to note, the caliber of talent coming in, because it shows the work of the staff, and, who knows what will happen on that weekend, but at the very least, these types of players are getting to come see the campus. So, that's that can only mean good things moving forward, and it shows that we have a coaching staff who is serious about recruiting.
Yeah, and when you look at that weekend, right now, according to On3, Nebraska has 19 recruits set to visit, that March 25th weekend. So 11 guys out of that 19 are rated as 4-star recruits according to the On3 industry rankings, and 4 of those guys are ranked in the top 53. You've got Rayola, Williams Nawari, the 5-star defensive
Mm-hmm.
tackle, Wingo, Nigel Smith, another D lineman,
Yeah,
and
he's
then
good.
you've got 2 others in the top 50, top 150, excuse me, and Carter Nelson and Andrew Sprague. And Nebraska happens to be leading with the recruiting prediction machine with both of those guys. Gatlin Bear is ranked 153. That's a big visit. I absolutely love that kid. I would love to get his commitment. He's like one of the, probably if I had to make a list of my top 5 targets that I would love Nebraska to land in 2024, he would make the cut. Honestly, I think he's that good of a player, and the fact that he's in the state of Idaho, it's very much like Nebraska, underrated in terms of recruiting rankings. So And then getting guys like, Hall that you mentioned, Caleb Benning, McMorris. I mean, they're getting all the key guys from the state and a lot of elite talent from elsewhere, and it's the thing that makes it so promising, I think, is, you can say, yeah, it's just a visit weekend or blah, 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 or whatever you want to say. But Matt Rule and this staff, at least from what we've seen so far, and it's, recruiting, they're still very early in their tenure, but when they get kids on campus, their hit rate tends to be pretty high. So, I mean, even if you look at this list and they hit on even 30% of this list, if they get 6
That's
commitments out of,
still pretty good.
you know what I mean? Like, we'll be
Yeah.
feeling pretty damn good about our recruiting class. So I that's why, it's important to get these visits because, when we get the visits, when this Rule staff gets the visits, they tend to, make hay with them, and it can lead to a commitment. Or even if this visit leads to an official visit down the road, we know what that means for Nebraska football. So it is a big deal.
It definitely is a big deal, and it also kind of gives, it's kind of like you have 19 kids on campus. I don't know. Dylan Rayola wants to play with Carter Nelson. Maybe Carter Nelson, wants to go to Nebraska. They start talking, and things happen. Something like that, and you know, it's just exciting to think about because, like you said, even if we land on 30% of those recruits, I would still be absolutely thrilled. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
it's nice to be able to feel confident in the recruiting direction, feel like Nebraska has a plan, get quality talent, and focus on keeping kids in the state of Nebraska. And it's also good to see that, there were a lot of recruits that the previous staff worked on, so to speak, and it's good to see this coaching staff following up with that and not losing the connections with guys like Hall and guys like Nelson and things like that. So I'm just excited about the work that they've done so far, and I'm excited about that visit weekend because you never know. I mean, from all the Matt Rule press conferences I've heard, that guy wants to make me suit up and get on the field as soon as possible. So, I mean, I can only imagine what his recruiting pitches are.
Yeah, and I totally blanked. I had a point and now I totally blanked on it. But here's what, yeah. So, I mean, I know Sean Callahan. This is what I wanted to bring up, but I know some people have mixed feelings about him. But what he's reported, that's one thing is, and he's been around this program a long time in Nebraska high school sports, and he said this is basically the most star-studded visit weekend that he can ever remember. So I think that's another noteworthy thing about it, and I think it's going to lead to pay dividends. We should mention, we just saw this, came out last night, but Daniel Kalen, one of the top players in the state of Nebraska, is going to be announcing his commitment today. He just visited Missouri this weekend. It was weird last week that Missouri and North Carolina both got crystal balls for him. So I'm guessing it's going to be one of those two. I haven't looked at the crystal balls. If I had to guess, I would see, maybe Missouri trending with that, because he just was there and announced that he wants to commit. So, take it for what it is with the Dylan Rayola sweepstakes. But I can almost guarantee you, and it may be difficult, but if Nebraska misses on Dylan Rayola, they're going to come back hard trying to flip Daniel Kalen. I guarantee it. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it's just something to kind of monitor.
Well, I'm also wondering if Dylan Rayola is getting all these kids to visit campus on the weekend he is to try to, get them to commit, and he's already some sort of silent commit or something like that. I don't know. But it really is interesting. You see Dylan Rayola come to campus on March 25th, and then the next thing you know, there's 18 guys, a lot of talented wide receivers, and a damn good tight end. So, I mean, I really don't know. I kind of just want this to end and want this figured out so that we can kind of, as fans, just feel a little bit, easier, calmer about the whole quarterback thing. And if we miss out on Kalen, which I'm kind of thinking we might, I mean, I think that means that we're all in on Rayola. And, if we miss on Rayola, we're going to have to, like you said, really work to try to flip Kalen. Because the thing that stands out to me is, he hasn't really mentioned Nebraska in any of the interviews he's done. He mentioned the crystal balls, so I don't think he's going to commit to Nebraska, but you never know. But yeah, if once Kalen commits today, I think Dylan Rayola is going to be the top target, and let's just hope everything works out. It's kind of nerve-wracking.
Yeah, it is. I mean, but yeah, I do think you're right on that. It's they're going to have to do some work with Kalen, but I mean, he hasn't mentioned Nebraska at all, and that's probably because they have put all their eggs basically in the Dylan Rayola basket, and part of that was when Rule and company first got here, Rayola was committed to Ohio State, so Daniel Kalen probably was the top target, and that changed a little bit. So look, I understand where he's coming from, and I wish him the best. I think he's a really good player, and it bums me out that he's not coming to Nebraska, but Nebraska you have to run out that recruitment with Dylan Raiola. And so we'll see how it goes. But at the same time, it's a long way till signing day. So, I'm not willing to, put it 100% that Daniel Kalen's not going to play for the Huskers, because if Raiola doesn't, then I still think there's a chance that he could get flipped. So we'll see how that goes. I may be crazy, but, that's kind of my thoughts there. So I do kind of have to get going here shortly. So let's start wrapping things up. I did want to touch on the baseball program. We did have, the last game against Illinois State got canceled on Sunday due to rain, but there was a 12-0 victory, an 8-3 win. Also, they beat Northern Colorado. So the Huskers are kind of on a roll right now, 9-4-1. So even though basketball just got over, it's daylight savings time, spring forward. So it's a great time to, get invested, in this baseball team.
This team can hit. This team can really hit.
Yeah,
So,
they can.
so that's always good to see. And I think we were all worried about after that first weekend. What will this team be? Well, they're starting to find their identity, and they can really kind of, they play well as a team, and they're never out of a game. So that's what you love to see. And I'll be interested to see how the rest of the season goes. But I'm very impressed with the bats so far.
Yeah, it's been fun. They've been a fun team to watch. They're hitting a lot of home runs, a lot of extra base hits, and with the pitching, which is also pretty strong. I think Nebraska's going to have a good chance of making some noise in the Big Ten this year. So, at any rate, make sure that you guys, if you like this video, if you like our Nebraska content, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. It really does, help make sure people see our content, more Nebraska people. So get into the comment section too. Let us know what you think about the NIT and in the future of Nebraska basketball, as well as this big March recruiting weekend. And also make sure you check out HuskerBigRed.com for all of our content. We're going to be previewing spring football, keeping you up to date on recruiting news, baseball, and everything else that has to do with the Huskers. So as always, for Chris Peterson and Danny Gillette, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.